And I think AI is bottlenecked only by the tools it has access to. It's already very intelligent. So if we could give our AI the ability to pay for things on the internet and pay for more tools and access, it can effectively be just a lot more useful to us. And then that's where X402 and MPP come in.
Welcome to Tokenized, the show focused on stablecoins and the institutional adoption of tokenized real-world assets. My name is Andrew Van Aken, stablecoin lead at Artemis, a crypto analytics startup. I would like to welcome you to a special episode of Tokenized, where we're diving deep into all things AI. You might have heard about it. To do this, we are joined by Lucas Shin, an analyst at Artemis. Sir, how are you doing on this fine morning?
Doing well. Excited to be here.
Have you heard of this AI trend, or is this new to you?
I have, yes. Just hearing about it a little bit all over the timeline.
Excellent. Well, we're in good hands because Lucas has done an extensive work on all things agentic commerce and payments. And I am very excited to learn more and dive into all things AI and payments. A quick disclaimer before we get into things. I need to remind you that the views or opinions of our contributors today are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the companies they are representing. Nothing we say should be taken as tax, financial, investment, or legal advice. Do your own research. And lastly, before we get into things, I'm thrilled to remind you that this podcast is made possible by Visa and powered by Artemis. So, Lucas, I wanted to have you on the podcast because I think you've been doing some really great work recently on all things agentic finance and all things really tracking data around agentic finance and agentic commerce. And I kind of wanted to start by just asking, because I feel like this term agentic finance, agentic payments has just been thrown out and used all the time. When you hear that, when you hear me rambling about agentic payments, like what does agentic payments mean to you? That'll be like the first very soft question.
Yeah, so there are definitely a lot of ways to interpret agentic payments and agentic commerce. What I'm most focused on and what I'm most interested in is the bucket of agentic payments where you're using an agent or you're interacting with your cloud code, and you're able to just easily pay for web resources um, through any of these means. So it's less so the agentic shopping cart, like through your ChatGPT, being able to buy the same things that we already pay for today. It's more the new surface area, where as a developer, you might be able to pay for an API endpoint and just kind of integrate it into your workflow.
So when my agent is browsing the best deal on a plane, this is not something that we're talking about. We're talking about like, okay, I have a Claude bot, I have an agent that is looking to buy a API call or a piece of data from something, and that agent is going to do that for me.
Exactly. Yeah. I think both can be included, but I think the more exciting part is the new emerging economy, which is things that we wouldn't pay for today.
Yeah, and so this is really like almost, I would say, 6 months old or so. What pulled you into this? What was the catalyst to get you interested in this space?
Yeah, so I was brought to Artemis to kind of build out the crypto and AI vertical and be the expert there. But if you know Artemis, you know one of our specialties has been stablecoins and payments. And I've always been interested in AI. Before Artemis, I was researching the intersection of crypto and AI at Delphi Digital, covering things like decentralized training, DePIN, and some identity protocols. But when X42 started gaining traction back in October, something about it felt different and it felt tangible. So as I began interacting more and more with AI tools like Cloud Code, and seeing how powerful AI was becoming, it just became apparent to me that agentic workflows were becoming a reality. And to me and many others, it felt obvious that uh, using AI for coding assistance was really just the start. And I think AI is bottlenecked only by the tools it has access to. It's already very intelligent. So if we could give our AI the ability to pay for things on the internet and pay for more tools and access, and it can effectively be just a lot more useful to us. And then that's where X402 and MPP come in. So to answer your question, finally, It all started because I wanted to find out what people were paying for with X402, how much of it was real, and then um, how much people were spending on the things that X402 and MPP make available.
That's a perfect segue. It's almost like you knew the next question. So, since this is a data podcast, we're going to take a look at some data. And so, what I have on the screen right now for the people listening at home is our agentic payments dashboard, which I believe you built from scratch, from nothing. There was nothing, and then Lucas came, and then there was something. Um, so we're looking at a chart of total agentic payment transactions since the beginning of these protocols. And what we see is like this enormous spike in transactions right around Thanksgiving. So maybe these agentic payments are doing some Black Friday shopping and they're buying, all their API calls. Oh, that was a joke. And then there's like a decline after Christmas. So it definitely seems like, even though the bots are not buying things, it's very seasonal. So I guess like when you saw this spike of transactions, I guess like my first question is really like what's going on here? Like what are these agents actually doing?
Yeah, so especially in 2025 or the end of 2025, I mean, obviously that was the peak in activity, but it was pretty obvious to most of the people deep in the ecosystem that the activity was very meme coin driven. So a lot of the projects building X402 related products, or maybe they weren't even X402 companies, but they were just trying to capitalize on this narrative. A lot of these companies or projects were attaching a meme coin to what they were building. And um, there's a good tracker in the ecosystem, X402 Scan, which that was kind of the first place that you could track what's going on in X402. And there's a leaderboard on that website. So a lot of new projects were trying to get to the top of that leaderboard, gain attention. So this is kind of what fueled a lot of the huge activity and volume at the end of 2025.
So if we go back 30 days, we're seeing that, let's see. So Dexter Cash, Block Run, Stable, Enrich, .dev, Clash of Coins, probably a meme coin. So it's like essentially these companies launch, or sorry, these protocols launch a coin associated with it and are trying to get to the top of the leaderboard as quickly as they can. So they essentially like create volume to make it seem like they're actually facilitating transaction volume.
I would say that is the case. Sometimes, definitely not
Mhm.
every name on this list is doing that.
That's true. We should.
For example, like something like Block Run is a really cool use case.
Mhm.
It's basically routing your inference. So if you're using OpenClaw and spending thousands of dollars a month on tokens, um, you're a lot of times overpaying because you wouldn't want to use Opus 446 for like a simple question. But um, with Block Run, you can kind of submit a query, or your OpenClaw has a query. Based on how complicated it is, it will route your query to the cheapest model that can accomplish or get the answer for your query. Um,
Mm.
that's actually a cool use case that I've
Wow, that
seen.
I mean, I've kind of thought about that, but I've never put it into the context of crypto of like DEX aggregators where like you're like putting in an order and it's like you're getting best execution
Yeah,
almost.
yeah, it's
It's like
effectively that. Yeah.
okay, very interesting. Um, so I know you have like a gamed versus so yeah, so from that, you decide, "Hey, okay, look, let's try and figure out, like, what is actually, like, going on, and, like, what are people, like, actually really using it for?" Like, I'm like, Block.run, it seems like, would save people a lot of money, and so that they'd be, like, actually using it for. So can you walk us through, okay, now that you see that there are a lot of meme coins being launched and whatnot, what what's the next step of to determine, like, how can we get to an accurate picture of what's going on in agentic payments?
Yeah, so this has been kind of an iterative process, but the purpose of this games versus real uh, flagging is obviously there's a lot of testing going on. It's a developing ecosystem, but to be able to get a good picture of what's happening, I need to at least filter out wash trading. If people are circling back funds through facilitators, just back to themselves, that that really isn't telling us anything about genuine demand. So I guess my first iteration captured two scenarios. One of them was um, I was seeing that some of the merchants were actually routing X402 payments through a facilitator back to their own wallet. So
Mm,
obvious wash trading. And then there was also another scenario where a seller would directly fund the buyer who would buy a service or send money back to their own wallet. So these are classic wash trading patterns. What was interesting was I wanted to build in the open, so I decided to make this methodology public early on. Um, but when I did this, we saw an immediate drop off in the flagged games transactions literally like the next day. It's like someone
wow.
flipped the switch and turned the gaming off. Um, and so overall activity went down, and then also the like the percentage of gamed transactions went down. But then slowly X402 activity picked back up, but this time with um, like a lot less gamed transactions. So obviously, uh, a lot of these projects found a way around the flagging that we were using. So then I iterated further, made the approach more heuristic based, but this time kind of decided it would be best not to publicly announce the exact methodology just because that would make it a little bit too easy to find a way around.
Yeah.
So that kind of takes us to where we are today.
Gotcha. I mean, the data looks pretty interesting. So what we're looking at is a chart of percent of game transactions of X402 and Tempo's machine payments protocol, and it's about. I mean, it fluctuates day by day, but it's anywhere between 10 and 30-ish%, I'd say, of game transactions, which is not that bad, I would say. I mean, considering that for some campaigns like airdrop farming, you see tons of um,
Hmm.
transactions that are. But so I think we're starting to see almost like an evolution or like of the space to like actual like use cases. Um, so what I found super interesting about this chart. So we're looking at a chart of average transaction size between the two X402 protocol and machine payments protocol, the Tempo protocol. And I find it very interesting that the average transaction size on X402 is about $40, but the average transaction size on MPP is actually 6 cents. So it almost like to your point earlier about these agentic payment, like using API calls, it seems like that would be in the realm of price. Um, I guess one of the things I'm most curious about is like, and I know you kind of alluded to this earlier, but like, what are people like actually spending on right now? Like, what are the most promising use cases you're tracking? And what are these? What are they buying? Because they're clearly not buying cars for me. I'm not buying my car on Gen Payment. But like, what does like an actual workflow look like?
Yeah, so a couple questions there. I think the first thing I want to start off with is like this is filtered to the last month, and in the last month we've seen on X402 um,
Mm,
instead of unlabeled merchants being included and picked up. Um, this has been a question that's come up a lot, and it's really just a handful of X402 endpoints, or they may not even be endpoints. They could be people using X402 payments for non-agentic use cases, if that makes sense.
hmm.
So there's really only a handful that are contributing very large dollar amounts. in their payments. So like this is being skewed up a lot in the past month.
Gotcha. But it seems like early March. Okay, yeah, like early March in February, like you do get that like 30-cent level transaction
Yeah,
type. But
yeah.
yeah,
I
gotcha.
would say that's more aligned with what's
Gotcha.
actually happening.
Okay.
Um, I could filter out some of these high value transactions, but I do want to stay objective, and when I don't have the exact labels for some of these, I don't want to just um, filter them out
Yeah,
just because.
that makes sense.
But to answer your other question, what people are really using this for, I think Kai Sheffield's coined this term, but command line interface, I think that's the biggest use case. It's either using cloud code from your terminal and connecting API endpoints to um, enrich your research process or your web search or your like lead enrichment. Those are the biggest use cases right now.
Hmm.
There's also just if you're using OpenClaw, you want to make your OpenClaw more powerful and give it some skills, then you give it the ability to pay for things, and it can go out and find the best resources to do so. Um, but I think the biggest user right now is either um, developers who want to test this cool emerging technology, or um, sales and GTM people who uh, want to say something like, "Find me 50 leads from Series B fintechs," um, and send an email to them
Mm-hmm.
based on where they went to school, um, what they majored in, how long they've been at a company. So it can go in and scrape LinkedIn or some other platforms on the internet and kind of aggregate this information and actually send an email for you. Um, so I guess that's the closest thing that we have to product market fit, I would say.
Gotcha, gotcha. I think I glossed over this question, but what's the difference between X402 and machine payments protocol?
Yeah. So at the highest level, they solve the same problem. Basically, an agent requests a resource, the server says pay me, and then the agent pays, and then the server delivers. So both of these use the 402 status code. But I'd say one of the biggest differences is that X402 uses a facilitator model, while MPP does not. So a facilitator, for if you aren't familiar, is essentially a trusted third party that sits between the client and the server. Facilitator receives the payment, verifies the transaction, and then they send the payment to the server. Um, some of these facilitators include Coinbase CDP. They have their own. There's PayAI, Corbits, and many others. But on the MPP side, there is no facilitator, and instead they use direct two-party setup where the client pays and then the server themselves verifies the payment and then delivers the paid resource. And then I think the other important difference between these two standards is what kind of payment does each support. So right now, X402 only supports one-shot charges, where you basically settle funds each time you use the web service. Uh, so one settlement per use, basically. Then um, MPP supports this type of payment, but also session-based payments, which are basically streaming escrow channels. So as a buyer, you'd be able to deposit some amount upfront and then settle in batches incrementally as you consume the web service. So after you close your session, the remaining funds are returned back to you.
Gotcha. So do you think that we could even go lower than, 4 or 5 cents a transaction if it's like if we don't need to settle every single transaction, we could go even lower than that?
100%. Yeah, I think so. Um, we're So if you go to the MPP deep dive page, so just
Yeah,
type in
let's do it.
MPP here, deep dive, and scroll down. There's like a breakdown by payment type.
Okay.
So charges are that one off settlement type, and then sessions are the streaming. But what's interesting here is, I guess if you even go further down, you can see average price or average transaction size.
Okay.
So what's interesting here is the session is actually higher dollar amount, but that's because we're tracking one transaction is essentially one settlement. So that maybe multiple batched transactions settled at one time.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, so you're doing all these payments, and then they all get batched together, and you're sort of, like, netting out the differences and then charging people.
Exactly, exactly. So I can make like 100 10-cent transactions, and that would be, um, yeah, that would be $1.
Gotcha, gotcha, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So, maybe it's not like we're doing, hundreds of millions of transactions a minute, or an hour, or whatever, but we're kind of, like, batching them together. Um,
Yes.
okay, that makes sense.
I think that's interesting because it gets around um, the problem of being able to support billions of transactions.
Mm,
Like, if you have to know them all each time you make a transaction, it's I think it's a lot more difficult than batching together. So it's
yeah,
just another, way we can make this work.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think that I wouldn't say it's the elephant in the room, but the volumes are still pretty small, and I look, I acknowledge that we're still very early on, and it's, like, mostly a developer, like, focus game, and so what we're looking at is essentially X402 volume by chain. Um, I pretty there's obviously been a spike recently. I mean, earlier in March, we were seeing, maybe, 50 to $100,000 a day. Now we're seeing, in the millions of dollars a day. It's kind of like what you talked about, this, like, other category popping up, but
Hmm.
what do you think needs to happen for, this to really take off? And, like, what sort of resources do you need to see come to fruition?
Yeah, so it's 2 things, supply side and discovery. So on the supply side, if I'm a user, there aren't even enough useful endpoints right now that I think agents would actually want to pay for.
Mm,
There are some cool hints of useful use cases, but I think the supply side has to grow a ton. And I think by the end of the year, we'll easily have tens of thousands of these X402 or MPP enabled endpoints, especially with AI making it so easy to build these types of web products. Um, but then when this happens and the supply side grows, we'll need a reliable way to find the right resource for any given task. It kind of defeats the purpose of this whole agentic payments thing if there are all these useful resources, but we can't find the right one. Then it'll have to be manual. I don't want to have to tell my agent or my cloud bot to use a specific endpoint every time. Like, I just want to give a high level objective, and the agent is able to find the right resource. So I think kind of like that recommendation system needs to improve.
mm,
It's a really tough problem, but um, we'll kind of unlock this whole ecosystem. Yeah, and then the last thing is just we're seeing hints of what the type of customer is that is going to use this technology and payment method, but that customer base is still being born. And right now, it's a slow ramp up, but I think the demand side will also increase very quickly by the end of the year.
yeah, we're looking at a chart here of, the cumulative number of X402 sellers, and it's doubled since March. So March, we had about 2,000, cumulative sellers. Now we're looking at it's more than double, actually, 5,000. So, is this probably a good metric to watch in terms of, okay, like, are people experimenting with the protocol, this, like, um, number of things that agents can do, essentially, the number of sellers?
Yeah, exactly. It's what I was just kind of alluding to, just the supply side growing. And I think one thing I want to call out here is, do you see how it says adjusted at the top here?
Yeah.
So we're not tracking only the number of sellers that we've ever seen. We're only filtering for the sellers that have greater than two real transactions, quote unquote
Mhm.
real transactions, and then at least two unique buyers. So you kind of have to qualify to be included in this metric.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. But that makes sense. Like, I mean, if I can just buy and sell for myself, it probably shouldn't tell people that
Right,
part.
right.
Yeah,
It's another attempt at trying to clear the noise.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. Um, Lucas, I feel like we covered a lot. Did I miss anything, or is there anything else that people should know about the agentic commerce revolution that we're seeing?
I would just say I would just encourage people to experiment, play around with the tools that are available right now. I'm always a little worried about being left behind, and I think this is a cool area to pay attention to.
Oh, I haven't made an agentic commerce transaction yet, so I'm already behind. If you're sitting at a payments company, like let's say you're like the VP of payments at like Shift4 or a company like that, like how would you recommend people get started, or how would you recommend payments teams get started with these new initiatives?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always comes down to testing things yourself. I think that just gives you a better idea of how powerful this stuff is, and I think this is just remember it's an important emerging economy, and I think it could become very large. So I wouldn't want to miss out on some of the volume that goes through this emerging economy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, Lucas, I think that's all the time we have for today. Where can people find more about you and more the work you're doing at Artemis?
I tweet a lot. My Twitter is or my X is onchain Lou, one word. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to. Well, I already follow you, and I mean, you've put out some great research recently. Some very long, detailed dives into all things agentic, commerce, market maps, analysis, payment. So, I would highly check it out if you haven't followed Lucas already. A lot of good materials out there. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Tokenize on Apple, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. And finally, if you enjoyed the show and want more, leave us a review. It helps find the show. Stay stable, everyone.